Henderson snaps his fingers again. Municipal water? Unacceptable. Esther, fluent in a language he butchers to humiliate a lost tourist, feels a familiar rage. The quiet man in the corner watches, his gaze unnervingly perceptive. He knows something she doesn't. Her stale coffee-scented life is about to explode. He had the attention of a man who didn't just see a waitress. He saw a wasted masterpiece. It's a story of a cryptic note, a private jet ticket, and a test so demanding it could shatter her or turn her into the person she was always meant to be. The smell of stale coffee and burnt bacon grease was the perfume of Esther Beaumont's life. It clung to her hair, her cheap polyester uniform, and the weary lines around her 26-year-old eyes. She worked at the Astor Diner in Manhattan's Upper East Side, a place that, like its name, pretended to be something grander than it was. It had polished brass railings that were always smudged with fingerprints and red vinyl booths that were cracked like old leather. It was a purgatory for the city's aspiring artists, actors, and in Esther's case, forgotten scholars. Each morning she would tie her apron, the strings frayed from 1,000 shifts, and paste on a smile that rarely reached her eyes. She was good at her job, efficient, polite, and almost invisible, the perfect waitress. No one poring over their Wall Street Journal or complaining about the temperature of their soup would ever guess that Esther could dissect the semiotics of Renaissance art or debate French existentialist philosophy. No one knew that 4 years ago she had been a top student at the Seine in Paris, living a life painted in the vibrant colors of her dreams. Then came the phone call, her father's heart attack, the collapse of his small construction business, the mountain of unforeseen debt. Her dream dissolved overnight. She flew home, leaving behind the cobblestone streets of the Latin Quarter for the cracked pavement of a tiny Queens apartment she now shared with her friend Ma. Paris became a ghost, a painful whisper of a life that belonged to someone else. "Order up!" Beaumont barked Saul the cook, his voice a growly roar over the sizzle of the griddle. Esther grabbed the heavy plates, the heat warming her forearms. "Thanks, S." She moved through the cramped diner with a practiced grace, weaving between tables and busboys. Table 7 was her nemesis today, a man in a pinstripe suit, probably in his late 40s, who had already sent back his orange juice because it had too much pulp. His name was Mr. Henderson, and he was trying desperately to impress his much younger date and make sure the steak is medium rare, he'd ordered earlier, snapping his fingers. Not medium, not rare. If it bleeds, I'm sending it back. If it's gray, I'm sending it back. Got it, sweetheart? Esther had just smiled. Perfectly clear, sir. As she navigated the lunchtime rush, her eyes briefly scanned the room. In the far corner booth, a man sat alone. He was different from the usual aider crowd. He wasn't on his phone or trying to be seen. He was just watching. He was dressed in a simple dark gray cashmere sweater and charcoal trousers. There was no flashy watch, no ostentatious display of wealth, but the cut of his clothes and the quiet intensity in his gaze spoke of a different world. He nursed a single black coffee, and every time she passed, she felt his observant eyes on her. It wasn't creepy, just analytical. She'd pegged him as a writer, or perhaps a professor. He had an air of quiet contemplation about him. 2 more coffees for table 9, Maya whispered as they crossed paths near the kitchen. And Henderson is asking for you again. He says his water tastes too municipal. Esther sighed, rubbing her temple. Of course he does. I'll get the bottled water. It was just another Tuesday, a relentless cycle of pouring coffee, taking orders, and absorbing the casual condescension of people who had never known what it felt like to choose between paying the electricity bill and buying groceries. She moved toward Henderson's table, her tray of water bottles balanced perfectly, unaware that this mundane, soul-crushing Tuesday was about to cleave her life in two. The man in the corner took a slow sip of his coffee, his gaze following her, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. He wasn't just watching a waitress, he was waiting. The bell above the diner door chimed, announcing a new arrival. An elderly woman, looking flustered and out of place, stepped inside. She clutched a large handbag, her eyes wide and scanning the chaotic room as if she'd walked into a foreign jungle. Her clothes were elegant but simple, a classic trench coat over a silk scarf, suggesting a tourist who had taken a wrong turn off Madison Avenue. She approached the host stand where a new hire, a teenager named Kevin, was struggling to manage the seating chart. "A table? S'il vous plaît?" she asked, her English heavily accented and uncertain. Kevin stared at her blankly. "A what table?" "For one." "S'il vous plaît?" she repeated, her voice trembling slightly. Yeah, hold on," Kevin mumbled, not looking up from his list. The woman waited, looking increasingly distressed. She tried again, this time in her native tongue, a rapid-fire stream of French, explaining she was lost. Her phone battery was dead, and she was supposed to meet her tour group at the Met, but she thought it was the Guggenheim. Kevin just shook his head. "Sorry, lady, I don't speak whatever that is." Spanish. From his table, Mr. Henderson let out a loud theatrical sigh. "Oh, for heaven's sake, let a man of culture handle this." He pushed his chair back and stood up, puffing out his chest as he approached the woman. "Bonjour, madame," he said, his accent a grotesque caricature. I can help you. You, want a table?" The French woman just looked more confused. Esther, who was delivering a basket of bread to a nearby table, felt a hot flush of secondhand embarrassment. It was painful to listen to. Henderson was butchering the language, turning its beautiful lyricism into a clumsy assault on the ears. "Voulez-vous?" Sit down," he continued, gesturing wildly at an empty table. Esther couldn't stand it anymore. It was more than just his terrible French. It was his arrogance, his smug satisfaction in making a spectacle of this poor, lost woman. It was the same condescension he'd shown her all afternoon. Something inside her, the part of her that remembered strolling along the sand and debating Foucault, finally snapped. She placed the bread on the table, wiped her hands on her apron, and approached the elderly woman. The man in the corner booth. Alexander Sterling leaned forward ever so slightly, his coffee cup paused halfway to his lips. Esther looked at the woman and smiled gently, and then she spoke. The voice that came out was not the tired, flat voice of a New York waitress. It was a voice from another life, a voice that was as smooth and clear as a bell. "Madame," she began, her Parisian accent, flawless and pure. "Perdue, madame, pardon. Me for the interruption. This man doesn't understand you. May I help you? You seem lost." The room seemed to fall silent around their small group. Henderson's jaw went slack. His date stared at Esther with wide, disbelieving eyes. S peeked out from the kitchen window. The French woman's face, however, lit up with profound relief. "Oh, mon Dieu, oui," she exclaimed, her hand flying to her chest. She launched into her story again, but this time the words found a safe harbor. She explained her confusion about the museums, her dead phone, her worry about her tour group leaving without her. Esther listened patiently, nodding and offering reassuring words. "Madame Songe," she said soothingly. "Don't you worry, madame. Everything will be all right." She turned to Kevin. "Kevin, can you seat this lady at table 12, please, and bring her a glass of water and a menu?" Then she turned back to the woman. "Please have a seat. Let me use my phone to call your tour guide. What is the name of the company?" While the woman, whose name was Madame Dubois, fumbled in her purse for the tour company's brochure, Esther turned to face Mr. Henderson. His face was a mottled shade of red, a mixture of fury and humiliation. "If you'll excuse me, sir," Esther said, her voice reverting to its polite, professional tone, "I'll get you that bottled water now." She didn't wait for a reply. She walked away, leaving him standing there, utterly deflated. She retrieved her phone from her locker, made a quick call, and sorted out Madame Dubois' predicament. The tour bus was waiting for another hour. She gave the woman clear directions written down on a napkin to a taxi stand just a block away. Madame Dubois was awesive in her gratitude, pressing a crumpled $20 bill into Esther's hand, which Esther gently refused. "C'est le voyage. It's my pleasure, madame. Have a safe trip." As Madame Dubois left, a sense of quiet satisfaction settled over Esther. For the first time in a long time, she felt like herself again. She had forgotten what that felt like. She went to clear Henderson's table, expecting him to be gone. He was, but he'd left a paltry $1 tip on a $100 bill. She wasn't surprised. What did surprise her was that the man in the corner booth was also getting up to leave. He caught her eye as he slid on a tailored navy blue coat. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod, a look of profound appraisal in his eyes. He left a crisp $100 bill on his table for a $3 coffee and walked out without a word. Esther pocketed the generous tip, feeling a small thrill of victory. She thought that was the end of it, a brief, satisfying moment of rebellion in an otherwise gray existence. She had no idea it was only the beginning. The rest of the shift passed in a blur of routine. The diner emptied out the frantic energy of the lunch rush, replaced by the quiet hum of the late afternoon. Esther refilled salt shakers, wiped down sticky ketchup bottles, and tried not to think about Mr. M. Henderson's sneer or the surprising weight of the quiet man's gaze. She was just Esther, the waitress. Then the flicker of the sore-born student had been hold just that, a flicker. When her shift finally ended at 5 p.m., she felt the familiar ache in her feet and the deeper ache in her soul. She slung her worn messenger bag over her shoulder and headed for the back exit. "Hey, Beaumont," she turned. It was S wiping his hands on his greasy apron. He was holding something, a sleek black envelope. The quiet guy, the one in the corner booth. "He came back a few minutes ago, said he forgot to give this to you. Told me to make sure you got it personally." Esther frowned, taking the envelope. It was made of heavy, expensive cardstock, unlike anything she'd ever held. There was no name on it, no address, just a simple, elegant silver seal holding it closed the stylized wings of what looked like a falcon. "Weird, right?" S grunted. "Looked like a spy or something." "Anyway, see you tomorrow." Esther murmured her thanks and slipped out into the alley. The evening air was cool against her flushed skin. Leaning against the brick wall under the dim glow of a security light, she broke the seal. Her fingers trembled slightly. Inside were two items. The first was a business card as thick and black as the envelope. The silver falcon crest was embossed at the top. Below it in minimalist silver lettering were a name and a title. Alexander Sterling, CEO, Sterling Innovations. Esther's breath caught in her throat. Sterling Innovations wasn't just some tech company, it was a global titan. A behemoth in aerospace logistics and cutting-edge AI, Alexander Sterling was a legend, a reclusive genius who had built an empire from scratch. He was a billionaire many times over, famously private and rarely photographed. That was the quiet man from the diner. It seemed impossible. The second item made her heart stop altogether. It was a plane ticket, or rather a reservation confirmation for a private jet, a Gulfstream G650 scheduled to depart from Teterboro Airport in New Jersey the next day at noon. The destination, Labor Airport, Paris. The passenger's name, Esther Beaumont. Tucked into the fold of the ticket was a small handwritten note on matching black stationery. The handwriting was sharp and decisive, a bold, forward-slanting script in silver ink. "Miss Beaumont talent should never be wasted on serving mediocrity. A voice like yours belongs in Paris, not in a diner arguing over bottled water. A car will be waiting for you at your address tomorrow at 10 a.m. Your seat will be waiting. This is not a request, it's an opportunity." As Esther read the note once, then twice, then a third time, her mind reeled. The alley seemed to tilt, the sounds of the city fading into a dull roar. This had to be a joke, an elaborate, cruel prank. Maybe Henderson had set it up to mock her further, but how would he know her address and the expense? A private jet to Paris. She stumbled home in a daze, the black envelope clutched in her hand like a talisman. When she burst into her tiny Queens apartment, Maya was on the couch scrolling through her phone while a reality TV show blared in the background. "Wow, you look like you've seen a ghost," Maya said, looking up. Esther didn't speak. She just walked over and laid the contents of the envelope on the coffee table. The business card, the jet ticket, the note. Maya picked up the card. Sterling Innovations. Isn't that? Her eyes widened. She read the note, then looked at the ticket. She looked back at Esther, her mouth agape. "Slough. What is this?" "I don't know," Esther whispered, sinking onto the couch. "It's insane. He was there at the diner. The guy I told you about who left the $100 tip." Maya's initial shock quickly morphed into deep-seated suspicion. She was a paralegal, pragmatic, and protective by nature. "Okay, hold on. A strange billionaire leaves you a private jet ticket to Paris, Esther. This is every red flag in the book. This is how horror movies start. Human trafficking, a weird cult, some kind of creepy pretty woman fantasy. You cannot be serious. I know. I know, Esther said, running a hand through her hair. It's crazy. But the note, talent should never be wasted. He saw. He heard. He heard you speak French, Maya counted, standing up and pacing the small living room. That's it. For all you know, this guy has some bizarre fetish. Esther, you don't know anything about him. He's Alexander Sterling, Esther said quietly. He's one of the most famous businessmen in the world. He's not some random creep. Rich people can be the biggest creeps of all, Maya shot back. And how did he get your address? That's what I want to know. That's not just observant. That's investigative. It's stalker-level stuff. The question hung in the air, heavy and unnerving. How did he know where she lived? Esther's mind raced. He must have had someone follow her or run her name through a database. The ease with which he had pierced the veil of her anonymity was terrifying. But beneath the fear, something else was stirring. A wild, dangerous hope. Paris. The word alone was a physical ache in her chest. The ticket on the table wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a doorway back to the life that had been stolen from her. It was a chance. It was everything. What if it's real, Esther asked, her voice barely a whisper. What if it's just an opportunity, like he said? And what if it's a trap? Mia retorted, her arms crossed. You throw away your job, your life here on the whim of a man you met for 5 seconds, for a cryptic note. Be realistic. Esther looked around the cramped apartment at the peeling paint on the walls, the stack of overdue bills on the counter. She thought of her uniform hanging by the door smelling of grease. This was her reality. It was safe, predictable, and it was slowly suffocating her. The note said, "This is not a request." It felt like a command, but also a challenge to be more than what she had become. The fear was real. Maya's warnings were logical, but the pull of Paris, the intoxicating possibility of escape, was stronger. It was the most terrifying decision of her life. She looked at Maya, her oldest friend, her anchor in this difficult life. I think I have to go. Esther said, the words tasting strange and foreign on her tongue. I have to know. The next morning was a whirlwind of anxiety and adrenaline. Esther called the diner and quit, her voice shaking as she left a message for her manager, Mr. Davies. She imagined his annoyance, his casual dismissal of her as just another flaky waitress. The thought, which would have bothered her yesterday, felt strangely liberating today. Packing was a surreal experience. What does one pack for a clandestine trip to Paris offered by a reclusive billionaire? Her entire wardrobe consisted of worn jeans, faded t-shirts, and a single black dress she'd owned for 5 years. She stuffed them into her old scuffed suitcase, feeling foolish and hopelessly out of her depth. Maya watched her, a storm of worry on her face. I ran a background check on him, or tried to. He's a ghost. No scandals, no tabloid fodder, just business articles and philanthropy announcements. He's either a saint or very, very good at hiding things. Maybe he's just private, Esther said, trying to convince herself as much as Maya. Private people don't summon waitresses to Paris with anonymous notes, Mia shot back. I'm serious, Chloe. I've put a tracking app on your phone. Don't you dare turn it off. And I want you to check in with me every 3 hours. If I don't hear from you, I'm calling the embassy, the GERM, the CIA. I swear to God, Esther hugged her friend tightly, grateful for her fierce loyalty. I'll be careful, I promise. At precisely 1000 a.m., a black Mercedes-Benz S-Class sedan, so silent it seemed to materialize out of thin air, pulled up to their apartment building. A chauffeur in a crisp black suit stepped out and opened the rear door. He didn't ask for her name. He simply nodded and said, Miss Beaumont, we are ready when you are. The ride to Teterboro Airport was silent and smooth. Esther stared out the tinted windows at the city rushing by, feeling a profound sense of detachment, as if she were watching a movie of someone else's life. They didn't go to the main terminal, but to a private executive hangar. There, gleaming on the tarmac, was the Gulfstream G650. It was a vision of power and grace, larger and more imposing than she could have ever imagined. A flight attendant, with a warm smile, greeted her at the steps. "Welcome aboard, Miss Beaumont. Mr. Sterling has arranged everything for your comfort. May I take your bag?" The interior of the jet was a study in understated luxury. Cream leather seats, polished mahogany wood, and subtle silver accents that echoed the Falcon crest. It was more like a flying luxury apartment than an airplane. She was the only passenger. As the jet taxied down the runway, Esther's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it, the point of no return. The engines roared and the plane surged forward with incredible force, pressing her back into her plush seat. Within moments, they were airborne, climbing steeply into the clouds. Below her, New York City shrank the diner. Her apartment, her old life, all of it vanishing into a haze. She was untethered, suspended between the world she knew and a future that was a complete and terrifying unknown. The flight attendant served her a lunch that was better than any meal she had ever served at the Astor Diner. Poached salmon, asparagus with hollandaise, and a glass of champagne that fizzed like liquid stars on her tongue. It all felt like a dream. She half expected to wake up to the sound of her alarm clock in her tiny queen's bedroom. But 7 hours later, the dream continued. As the jet began its descent, the lights of Paris emerged from the darkness below a glittering carpet of gold and silver. The Eiffel Tower lit up in its nightly spectacle, pierced the sky like a diamond needle. A lump formed in Esther's throat. She was back. After 4 years of yearning, she was finally back. They landed at Labor, the private airport north of the city. There was no customs line, no baggage claim, chaos. She was escorted from the plane directly to another waiting car, another silent chauffeur. They drove through the streets of Paris, past familiar landmarks that made her heart ache with a bittersweet nostalgia. The Arc Triumph, the Chaise, it was all as beautiful as she remembered. The car, however, didn't stop at a hotel. It pulled up to a set of imposing wrought iron gates that opened onto a private tree-lined cobblestone drive. At the end of it stood a magnificent hotel particular, a grand private Parisian mansion in the 16th arrondissement. It was a palace of limestone and slate, its windows glowing warmly in the night. The chauffeur opened her door. "Welcome to Mr. Sterling's Parisian residence, Miss Burma." Her legs felt weak as she walked up the stone steps. The massive oak door swung open before she could touch it. Standing in the grand marble-floored foyer was Alexander Sterling. He was dressed in a simple dark sweater and trousers just as he had been in the diner. Up close, she could see the faint lines of fatigue around his sharp, intelligent eyes. He was younger than she'd thought, perhaps in his late 30s. "Miss Beaumont," he said, his voice a calm, low baritone. "Welcome to Paris. I trust your flight was comfortable." Yes, thank you," she stammered, feeling small and out of place in the cavernous hall with its soaring ceilings and priceless-looking art. "Mr. Sterling, I don't understand any of this." "I know," he said, a faint smile touching his lips. "Clarity is the purpose of your visit, but first you must be exhausted. My housekeeper will show you to your room. We can talk in the morning." He gestured and a woman in a gray uniform appeared. As Esther followed her up a sweeping staircase, she glanced back. Alexander Sterling was watching her with the same unreadable, analytical expression he'd had in the diner. He hadn't explained a thing. The mystery, she realized, was only getting deeper. This was not a gift. It was a prelude. Esther awoke to the unfamiliar sensation of sleeping on sheets with a thread count higher than her monthly rent. Sunlight streamed through tall French windows, illuminating a bedroom that was larger than her entire queen's apartment. It was exquisitely decorated in shades of cream and soft gray, with a small marble fireplace and a private balcony overlooking a manicured garden. A fresh kvass and a cup of coffee were already waiting for her on a small table. It was a beautiful cage, and she was still a prisoner of confusion. After dressing in her one good black dress, which now felt woefully inadequate, she made her way downstairs. She found Alexander Sterling in a vast book-lined study, reviewing documents on a sleek, transparent tablet. He looked up as she entered, gesturing for her to sit in one of the leather armchairs opposite his large desk. "Good morning," he said. "Please have a seat, Mr. Sterling." She began, her voice firmer than she expected. "I appreciate the flight and the accommodations, But I need to know why I'm here. This is abnormal. Direct. I appreciate that, he said, setting his tablet aside and giving her his full attention. You are here, Miss Beaumont, because I am in need of a very specific skill set. A skill set I believe you possess despite your current employment. Before he could elaborate the study, doors opened. A woman entered, her heels clicking decisively on the polished parquet floor. She was tall, impossibly chic, and radiated an aura of intimidating authority. She wore a perfectly tailored Christian Dior suit, and her dark hair was pulled back in a severe shiny. Her eyes, the same piercing gray as Alexander's, swept over Esther with a cool, dismissive glance. "Alexander, you're late for the LFOV preliminary," she said, her voice crisp and laced with an accent that was a hybrid of British boarding school and American corporate law. She stopped and looked at Esther again, a flicker of annoyance crossing her features. "Is this her?" "The waitress." Alexander's face remained impassive. "Esther Beaumont. This is my sister, Isabel Sterling. She's the Chief Operating Officer of Sterling Innovations." "Isabel, this is Miss Beaumont." Isabel offered a smile that was as sharp and cold as a shard of glass. "A pleasure, though I confess I don't quite understand the purpose of this experiment, Alexander." She turned her gaze back to Esther. "My brother has a pant for seeing potential in the most unlikely of places. He seems to think that because you can speak French, you can solve a multi-billion-dollar problem for us." Esther's head was spinning. Our multi-billion-dollar problem. What did they think she was? Alexander finally offered an explanation. "Sterling Innovations is in the final stages of acquiring a company, a French company, Maison Lefebvre." Esther knew the name. Everyone did. Maison Lefebvre was a legendary Parisian luxury house founded in the 18th century. They were famous for their bespoke leather goods and perfumes, a bastion of old-world craftsmanship and French heritage. "Lefebvre is family-owned," Alexander continued. "It has been for 8 generations, and the current matriarch, Geneviève Lev, is resistant to the acquisition. She is a traditionalist. She believes an American tech company like ours will destroy her family's legacy. We've sent teams of the best lawyers and negotiators in the world, and they've all failed. They don't speak her language. And I don't mean French," Isabel interjected, her tone dripping with skepticism. "They don't speak the language of the nuance of culture, of respect for tradition. Geneviève Lefebvre slammed the door on our last M&A head because he wore white sneakers to a meeting." Esther was beginning to understand. "You need a translator." "No," Alexander said, leaning forward. "We have hundreds of translators. I need more than that. I need a bridge. I need someone who understands the subtlety of French culture, who can show respect for their heritage, but who also understands the directness and ambition of the American mindset. Someone who can navigate both worlds." He paused, his eyes locking onto hers. "In the diner, I didn't just see a waitress speaking French. I saw a woman of intelligence and grace handle a difficult, arrogant man with poise. Then I saw her treat a lost, frightened woman with compassion and empathy, using flawless colloquial French. Not to show off, but to genuinely connect and help. That combination, poise under pressure, cultural fluency, and genuine empathy, is rarer than you can imagine. It cannot be taught in a business school." Isabel let out a quiet, impatient sigh. "It's a romantic notion, Alexander. A lovely story. But this is a $2.7 billion acquisition, not a social experiment. Miss Beaumont has no corporate experience, no background in finance or law. She served pie yesterday. The insult landed like a physical blow, but Esther held her ground. She refused to let this woman diminish her. "And what is it you do exactly when you're not a waitress?" Isabel pressed her eyes, narrowing. "What hidden talents did my brother unearth with his little private investigation?" The question confirmed Esther's fears. He had investigated her. "I was a student," Esther said, her voice steady. "Here at the Sorbonne, I studied art history and French cultural studies. I had to leave before I could finish my degree due to a family emergency." Alexander nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something he already knew. Isabel, however, looked unimpressed. "So, you're a college dropout?" she stated flatly. "My sister lacks a certain subtlety," Alexander said, shooting a warning look at Isabel. Here is the situation, Miss Beaumont. This is not a vacation. It is for all intents and purposes a job interview. The most unorthodox job interview of your life. I want you to be part of the team meeting with Geneviève Lefebvre and her family. I don't want you to negotiate finances. I want you to listen, to observe, to build a bridge where we have only found walls. And if I succeed, Esther asked, if you help us secure this deal, Alexander said, I will create a position for you at this company, Director of Cultural Integration for our European acquisitions. You will have a new life, a salary that will solve any family debt you might have, and a career that utilizes your actual talents. I will also fund the completion of your degree, should you still wish for it. It was an offer that was beyond comprehension, a lifeline, not just to solvency, but to a life she thought was lost forever. And if I fail, Isabel answered before Alexander could. If you fail, Miss Beaumont, a car will take you back to labor, and you will be on the next flight back to New York. You can have your old job back at the diner. We will, of course, compensate you for your time. Her tone made it clear that failure was the only outcome she expected. The weight of their expectations of the entire surreal situation pressed down on Esther. This was insane. They were asking her to step into a corporate Shark Tank with nothing but a half-finished arts degree and her fluency in French. It was an impossible task. But then she thought of the diner, the grease, the condescension, the slow grinding death of her spirit. Failure here meant returning to that. Success meant everything. She looked from Isabel's cold, challenging stare to Alexander's quiet, expectant one. She took a deep breath. When is the meeting? She asked. The next 2 days were a brutal high-speed education in the world of corporate acquisitions. Esther was given an office in Sterling's Parisian headquarters on the Place Vendôme, a space with a view that was probably worth more than she had earned in her entire life. She was buried under an avalanche of files, financial reports, market analyses, legal documents, and most importantly, a thick dossier on Geneviève Lefebvre and her family. She devoured every page. She learned that Geneviève was 78 years old, a widow, and had run the company with an iron fist for 40 years. She was a legend in the fashion world, a purist who despised the modern trends of fast fashion and influencer marketing. The dossier was filled with failed attempts by other companies to acquire Maison Lefebvre. Geneviève had dismissed them all as vulgar merchants who wouldn't know a Birkin from a bucket. Isabel made her disdain for the situation clear. She would periodically enter Esther's office, quiz her on obscure financial data, and point out her lack of experience. Do you even know what EBITDA means, Miss Beaumont? She'd ask, a smug look on her face. No, Esther admitted honestly. But I know that Madame Lefebvre's favorite artist is Jean-Honoré Fragonard, that she believes the soul of her company resides in the specific stitching technique developed by her great-grandfather, and that she sees this deal not as a financial transaction, but as the potential orphanage of her family's legacy. Perhaps that is more important than earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. The response left Isabel momentarily speechless, which gave Esther a small surge of confidence. She knew she couldn't compete on their turf. She couldn't talk finance or law, but she could understand people. She could understand culture. That had to be her strength. The day of the meeting arrived. Esther was a bundle of nerves. A stylist summoned by Alexander had provided her with a simple, elegant, navy blue dress by a discreet French designer in low heels. Understated, respectful, the stylist had advised. The meeting was to be held at the Lefebvre flagship store on the Rue Chenor, a hallowed space that felt more like a museum than a shop. As their car pulled up, Esther could see a small army of lawyers and executives from Sterling Innovations, waiting on the sidewalk, all looking tense. Alexander, Isabel, and Esther got out of the car. Alexander gave Esther a reassuring nod. Remember, you are not here to speak for me. You are here to listen for me. Isabel simply sniffed. Try not to spill anything. They entered the building. The air inside was silent and smelled of expensive leather and jasmine. They were led up a private elevator to a formal salon on the top floor. And there, sitting in a Louis XVI armchair, was Geneviève Lefebvre. She was a small bird-like woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and perfectly coiffed silver hair. She was flanked by her two sons, both stern-faced men in their 50s. Introductions were made when Esther was introduced as part of our cultural liaison team. Genevieve's eyes lingered on her for a moment, a flicker of curiosity in their depths. The meeting began, and it was a disaster. Isabel, taking the lead, launched into a slick presentation filled with charts and projections about synergy, global market expansion, and shareholder value. She spoke with a cold corporate precision that clearly grated on Madame Lefebvre. The matriarch listened, her face an unreadable mask. After 15 minutes, she held up a delicate, age-potted hand. "Enough, Mademoiselle Sterling," she said, her voice soft, but carrying immense authority. "I have heard these words before. They are empty numbers on a page. You talk of expanding my brand. You speak of it as if it is a chain of coffee shops. You do not understand what we do here. The soul." Isabel's professional smile tightened. "Madame Lefebvre, with all due respect, the soul of a company does not pay its employees or fund its growth in a competitive global market." It was the wrong thing to say. A chill descended upon the room. Madame Lefebvre's son, Antoine, spoke for the first time. "My mother finds your approach aggressive, mademoiselle." The meeting devolved from there. The two sides were speaking different languages, just as Alexander had predicted. The Sterling team talked about efficiency and profit. The Leff family talked about heritage and art. Esther remained silent, watching and listening. She noticed the small details. She saw how Madame Lefebvre's hand rested on a particular leather-bound book on the table beside her. She noticed the painting on the wall behind her. Not a famous masterpiece, but a beautiful, intimate portrait of a woman in 18th century dress. It had the soft, romantic style of Fragonard, the artist mentioned in the dossier. As the meeting was about to end in a complete stalemate, Esther felt a desperate urge to do something. This was her one shot. Alexander caught her eye and she saw the question in his gaze. He gave her the slightest of nods. "Permission." "Madame Lefebvre," Esther said, her voice quiet but clear. The entire room turned to look at her. "Forgive my interruption." She stood up and walked not toward the negotiating table, but toward the painting on the wall. "This is a beautiful piece," she said, speaking in French. Her accent, so different from the formal textbook French of the translators, seemed to warm the air. "The brushwork is so delicate. It reminds me of Fragonard, but it's more intimate, less theatrical. Is it a family piece?" Genevieve Lefebvre's austere expression softened for the first time. She looked surprised and intrigued. "You have a good eye, mademoiselle. That is a portrait of my great-great-great-grandmother, painted by one of Fragonard's lesser-known students. It is my most treasured possession." "She is reading," Esther observed, looking closer. It was unusual for a woman to be painted reading in that era, unless she was a great intellectual. She must have been a remarkable woman. "She was Madame Lefebvre," said a note of pride in her voice. "She is the one who convinced her husband, a simple saddlemaker, to create the first handbag for Queen Marie Antoinette. She was the true founder of our house, her vision." Isabel was staring at Esther, her mouth slightly open, a look of utter disbelief on her face. The lawyers were shuffling their papers, confused by this sudden turn in conversation. Esther turned from the painting to face Madame Lefebvre. "Mr. Sterling's company is built on technology and data. It is a world of numbers. But he understands that a legacy like yours is not built on numbers. It is built on vision, the vision of a woman like her." She gestured to the portrait. "He does not want to erase that vision. He wants to give it a new voice, to share it with a world she could never have dreamed of. A company without a soul is just a machine. You are the soul of Mice and Lev. He is not here to buy a machine. He is here to protect a work of art." She had used the word art. She had connected the present to the past. She had shown that she saw not just a brand, but a story. Silence filled the room. Genevieve Lefebvre stared at Esther, her sharp eyes searching. Then she slowly turned her gaze to Alexander Sterling. "Your father was a builder. Was he not Mercier Sterling?" she asked. Alexander, who had remained silent, finally spoke. "He was a carpenter. He taught me that the foundation is everything." Madame Lefebvre nodded slowly. A small, genuine smile touched her lips for the first time. Perhaps we can have tea next week and you can leave your presentation," she said, gesturing to Isabel's laptop at your office. Just you and me. And she added, her eyes finding Esther. You will bring Mademoiselle Beaumont. The walk back to the car was surreal. The Sterling executives were buzzing with excitement, clapping Alexander on the back. For the first time in months, they had made progress. They had a second meeting. Isabel was silent, her expression a thunderous mix of shock and resentment. As they got into the car, she finally turned to Esther. That was a lucky trick, she said, her voice low and sharp. A parlor game with an old painting. It wasn't a trick, Isabel Alexander, said his voice firm. He looked at Esther, and for the first time she saw open admiration in his eyes. It was insight. She listened, something your team of experts failed to do. She found the foundation. Isabel said nothing more for the rest of the ride, simply staring out the window defeated. The tea with Madame Lefebvre the following week was a resounding success. Without the lawyers and presentations, the conversation flowed easily. Esther acted as the bridge, just as Alexander had hoped. She would translate not just their words, but their intent. When Alexander spoke of platforms and digital ecosystems, Esther would rephrase it to Madame Lefebvre as creating a digital atelier where the stories of the artisans could be shared with the world. They talked for hours, not about money, but about art history and legacy. By the end of the week, the deal was signed. Maison Lef was now part of Sterling Innovations, but with contractual guarantees protecting its heritage, its French workshops, and with Geneviève Lefebvre herself appointed to a lifetime seat on the board as a brand guardian. The night the deal was finalized, Alexander hosted a small celebration at his mansion. Esther stood on the balcony of her room, the same one she had woken up in just over a week ago, looking out at the twinkling lights of Paris. She felt like a completely different person from the weary waitress who had stepped off that plane. Alexander came to stand beside her. For a few moments, they stood in comfortable silence. I owe you a great deal, Esther, he said finally. You gave me an opportunity, she replied. That's more than anyone else ever has. The offer I made is on the table, he said, turning to face her. Director of Cultural Integration, a very generous salary, a housing allowance here in Paris, and a blank check for your education. It's yours. No interview required. This was it. The culmination of the impossible dream. A new life handed to her on a silver platter. But something had shifted in her over the past week. She had not just been acting as a bridge for him. She had been rebuilding a bridge to her own forgotten self. Thank you, she said, her heart pounding. It's an incredible offer, but I have a counter-proposal. Alexander raised an eyebrow, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. I'm listening. I don't want the job as a gift, she said, and I don't want you to pay for my degree. I want you to invest in me, not as an employee you discovered, but as a partner you value. She took a breath, summoning all the confidence she had gained. I want to run the Maison Lefebvre integration, not as a director of a department, but as the project lead. Give me a budget and a team, and I want a performance-based contract. If I succeed in doubling its digital presence while maintaining brand integrity in 2 years, I get a stake in the subsidiary. A small one, but a real one. And I'll pay for my own degree with the salary you give me. She was asking for responsibility, not a reward. She was asking for a chance to build something herself, not just be a well-paid accessory to his empire. Alexander Sterling stared at her, his analytical gaze replaced by one of genuine surprise, which slowly morphed into a broad, brilliant smile. It was the first time she had seen him truly smile, and it transformed his face. A college dropout waitress who served me coffee a week ago is now negotiating equity with me on a multi-billion-dollar deal, he said, shaking his head in disbelief. He let out a soft laugh. I knew my instincts were right about you, Esther Beaumont. I just had no idea how right. He extended his hand. You have a deal. Welcome to Sterling Innovations. Esther shook his hand, a current of electricity passing between them. It wasn't just a handshake, it was a contract. It was the closing of one chapter of her life and the explosive beginning of another. She was no longer a waitress who spoke French. She was a woman who had found her voice in more ways than one. And she was finally truly home. Esther's story isn't just about a lucky break. It's a powerful reminder that the person you are right now in whatever job you're working is not the final chapter. Your hidden talents, your forgotten passions, the skills you think no one sees, they have immense value. It was a single moment of kindness and a sentence in French that changed Esther's life. But it was her courage to step onto that jet, her intelligence to see the real problem, and her confidence to demand her true worth that secured her future. What hidden talent do you have that the world just hasn't seen yet? What would you have done if you found that black envelope? If this story inspired you or made you think, please give this video a thumbs up. It truly helps us bring more stories like this to you. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an incredible journey. And share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that their big break might be just one customer, one conversation, or one moment of courage away. Thank you for listening.